Today I am going to show you the best ways to paint a top of any piece of furniture. A table, a chest, a bedside table, a coffee table, or a side table. I am asking in advance to forgive me for the different volume levels of the background music, as I got together the fragments from my different videos. And honestly, I am still learning. Sometimes to edit a video is more difficult than to paint a piece of furniture, for me anyway. You will also see many different techniques, unusual tools, and products you would never think to use when painting furniture. Each top belongs to a piece I have painted and published a tutorial video on YouTube. If you want to watch the full tutorials on how I painted them, you can see the links to each piece in the description below. In the end of the video, as a bonus, I will show you the one which I haven't published. Stay with me to the end to see why. Now, let's get started. My first project is imitating a wood look. It is a veneer top, and it looks too shiny and boring. As a base color, I am going to use French linen chalk paint. I bought these tools on Amazon and hoping that one of them will help me to create a wood grain on this top. While the base color is still wet, I am taking two more colors, Unfleur and Cocoa, and before my base color gets dry, I am applying them randomly. I have applied two colors, and after spraying the top with water, I am spreading the paint over the surface, with the strokes along the long side of the top, the way the wood could be used. I smooth the colors over, blending them, using some water from my mister bottle to keep the surface wet. Without giving my paint any break, I am rolling my tool over the surface. Just note, for doing all of it, you have only time before the paint gets dry. You can mist it with water, but do not let it dry completely, or you will have to add another coat. When it all dry, I am slightly sanding the surface and wipe it with a dry rag. To seal the top, I am using some dark wood stain, which I got in the local DIY shop. And I just rolled it over the entire top. In my second project, you will learn the easiest way to update the furniture top with the paint wash. On the top, I am applying the wood stain and wiping it off. When the second coat of stain is still wet, I am randomly applying some blue paint. And smearing it over the surface. You might be surprised with my choice of the colors, but as you can see now, I was trying to match the tiles in our guest bathroom. In my next project, you will learn how to paint an aged country-style look. For the top, I am adding some black chalk paint to my base color, which is gray. I have done 2 coats of the base color mixed with the baking powder to create the texture. Now I am stippling in the paint. I haven't mixed the black and the gray properly, as I want to have the traces of the black and the gray to be seen. Later you will see why. Next step is a black paint wash. I am creating the spots of the different shades, which will be revealed in the end when I will sand the top. When the paint is dry, I am spraying it with water and applying a dark wood stain, again with no particular pattern. Then spraying it with water and taking the excesses off with a wet rag, leaving some spots darker than the others. When the last coat is dry, I have made my light mixture again, and I am spreading it with a wooden spatula. As I said before, the plastic spatula would be even better, but not the metal one. Then I took the black wash left over water and spread it over the top, creating the spots. I have let it dry, sanded slightly and covered with my light color wash, with very little paint in it, almost water. When the top is dry, I am distressing it with a spatula, revealing the layers underneath. Here I am using a metal spatula. Just a tip, it is easy to distress when you just go over the surface with a moist rag. To achieve a good result, don't wet the surface too much and don't press the spatula too hard. To finish, I have applied a clear wax, then a brown wax. Here is the finished result. This top is matching really well with the rest of the cabinet. Another example of an aged rustic country style, using different colors and different techniques. The top I have painted with a dark blue paint without a texture medium. Now I am going to use the leftovers of the paint. I am spraying it with water just to get it a bit loose. When it is completely dry, I am applying a thick coat of the old white chalk paint. And while it is still wet, I am sprinkling some salt over the top. Salt will help me to create a chippy, distressed look. Again, I left it overnight to dry and then sanded, exposing the paint underneath. After applying a clear wax, I have covered the top with the brown wax and rubbed it in. I have applied some more, rubbing it in, and next day I have slightly sanded the top as I wanted it to be lighter. And it is done. Here you will learn one of the easiest ways to create a stone effect. I decided to create a stone effect with the chalk paint. The first coat is the normal cover of a graphite chalk paint. And to create a lot of texture, I have added a sawdust into the second coat. I do not wash the sponge until I have finished the whole piece. It would be so much waste of the paint. I just slightly spray the sponge with water and squeeze it. The paint, which has accumulated inside the sponge, gets to the surface. On the top, I have applied 2 coats of a clear, water-based varnish. The varnish is normally more durable, and I am planning to use the surface a lot. Next 3 projects will introduce you to a few more ways of creating an aged look. I have covered the top with 2 coats of my base color, using sawdust as a texture. Now I am spreading the on-fleur chalk paint. I have tiny bit left on the bottom of the tin, and I diluted it with water. Then spraying with water and spreading it around. You do not need much paint here, better if it is quite loose. After I let it dry, I am covering the top with the patina wax. The combination of the graphite, the brown chalk paint, and the patina wax gives the top a rusty metal look. Here is a rusty aged look where the different exciting colors and techniques will give you a completely different look. The top I have painted with the same red as a base color with the spots of a dry sawdust. Then I have sanded it slightly, and now I am painting it with the graphite chalk paint, spraying it with water and spreading it thinly. To uncover the red, I have wiped off with the wet rag some of the graphite. Then I'm applying the Barcelona orange and Versailles, spraying the paint with water and spreading it over the surface with a window cleaner. It blends the two colors together nicely. When the paint is still wet, I am scratching it slightly with a plastic spatula to reveal the red paint. To bring it all together and to seal the paint, I am using the dark varnish, applying it first, then spraying with water and dabbing off some of it with a kitchen paper towel. And here it is done. One more way of creating a rusty, aged look on the furniture top. I'm starting with mixing plaster of Paris with water to use it for the stencil. Here is the consistency I will need. I am applying a quite thick but even layer of the plaster of Paris. The stencils are very dry now and ready for the next step. I have sanded the stencils slightly to make the surface even. Now I am covering the whole piece, including the stencils, with my base color, graphite chalk paint by Anniesloanchalkpaint. Here it is dry and ready for the next step. I am using Anniesloanchalkpaint Primer Red chalk paint here and a dry sawdust, but I do not mix them. I am applying the red paint first, then dipping the same brush into the dry sawdust and dabbing it into the paint. I am dry brushing the stencils as I want to leave the graphite in the low points. I am also leaving some of the graphite around the stencils, which will give them some shading later in the process. Applying the sawdust or any medium this way gives a different kind of texture comparing when I just mix it with the paint. I am using my Mr. bottle to spray the sawdust. It helps to dab it into the paint. When this cover is almost dry, I am taking some of the red paint off with the metal spatula. Depending on how dry the paint is, I am spraying it with more or less water. Because of the uneven surface created by the sawdust, the paint comes off easily, revealing the graphite underneath. Here, I am also using a metal kitchen brush and the wet rag. All those tools are helping me to create that naturally worn-out look I'm after. My next step is 2 colors of chalk paint, the cool bar green and the dark egg blue by Annie Sloan. And here I want to introduce my new tool, the shower sponge. Let's see what kind of texture we can create with this one. The cool bar green and the dark egg blue are 2 colors very close, but they will create slightly different shades. The cool bar green is a gray green and the dark egg blue is a greenish blue. Next, I am going to use a gold paint spray and a newspaper. Keep watching. I am spraying the surface with gold quite lightly. Then, spraying it with water and taking the excesses with a newspaper. All those tools I am using here are helping me to create an evenly painted surface, which hopefully will look natural. And to finish the piece, I am adding some of the antique gilded wax to the trim of the table. And slightly brushing with it the very tips of the stencils. And here it is ready to be used. Do you want to try to paint an old driftwood on the furniture top? To make a good texture, I mixed in a plaster of Paris with water. And applying the mixture only one way, the way I imagine the wooden strips will go. Mind you, I have slightly sanded the surface, as I don't really know whether the plaster will stick well. When the plaster is completely dry, I am sanding it really well, letting go any loose pieces. My next step is a black chalk paint. I will use 2 coats of it and will let it completely dry. Here it is dry and ready for the next step. I want to use Barcelona orange, but I do not have enough of it, and I am making my own mixture, adding some arl, half to half. But because the arl makes the paint lighter, I am adding tiny bit of red to get it as close to orange as possible. I also want to make my own blue shade and taking Giverny, mixing it with Paris grey. It is not as bright now, having some grey shade to it. I am making a paint wash by adding some water into the paint and pouring it into the spray bottle. One more color I want to use is the old white. Now I have all the paint I need to use for this project. Stay tuned to see how I shall use it. I'm starting with my orange, spreading it over with some water. Then adding the old white randomly, mostly closer to the middle, and blending them together. Next, I am spraying the surface with my blue mixture. While the paint is still wet, I am taking the excesses off with a newspaper. And here is the closer look when it is done. I let the brown dry and now dry brushing with the old white. Then slightly spraying it with water and taking the excesses off with the kitchen paper, just to make all the paint blend in together. Next step, Greek blue chalk paint. Watch how I am applying it. Now, when all the paint is dry, I am going to divide the surface into the pieces of wood. To bring it all together, I am sanding the surface. In some places, sanding it all the way to the black. One more step. I am probably repeating myself 100 times, but the end result greatly depends on how everything blends together. Here, I am using the leftovers I have made for another project. It is a mixture of the Untitled Chalk Paint with a water-based brown varnish. It will seal the paint and will create the wooden effect I am after. And here it is done. It wasn't difficult, was it? If you are interested whether the plaster will fall off the surface of my office chest, just ask me in a few months on my Instagram page. Again, old rustic country look with completely different colors of the chalk paint. I am spreading the Amsterdam green with the stippling technique, creating the texture. I want to create even more texture on my second coat. I left the paint opened in a container for overnight to get the consistency thicker. Applying a thick uneven coat, drying with the hairdryer, and layering the paint. Here you see how you can create a very thick uneven texture using only paint. After letting the base coat completely dry, my next step is a very thin coat of the old white, spraying it with water as I am applying it. Without drying the paint, I am applying the same way the old oak chalk paint. letting it become slightly dry, and sanding off most of the whites, leaving it just inside the texture in the low points of the green, sanding the edges, dusting off and applying a good coat of the clear wax. Then I am adding the black wax into the crevices and spreading a thin layer of the black wax over the entire top with the rag. This was the first variation of the top I have painted for the cabinet you just saw. In the end, I will tell you why I changed my mind. First coat is the Amsterdam green chalk paint, spread over the surface with a sea sponge. You can use any sponge here. If you try to use a sponge instead of a brush, you will see the difference in the texture. It is more natural comparing with the crisscross strokes and less rough than with the stippling technique. When the first coat is dry, I am applying a coat of a paprika red chalk paint, spreading it unevenly with a plastic spatula. Here is another way to create a really rough texture. Thicker the paint is, rougher the texture will be. With leftover of water, in which I kept my brush, I am sprinkling the top. When I leave water on the surface just for a couple of minutes, it penetrates the top layer of paint, making spots. Then I gently pick up water with a kitchen towel. You can see the spots water has created. My next step is a graphite chalk paint. And spraying the paint with water, I am applying a very thin layer of it. I waited until the paint half dry, and I am wiping the dry paint with the wet rag ever so slightly, and it is already pulling some of the paint off, exposing the layers beneath it. With help of a spatula, I am revealing the layers underneath even more. I am using a spatula and a wet rag because I want the texture to be as uneven as possible on this top. These two techniques are creating different textures. My next step is a cool bar green chalk paint. Again, I am spreading it with a plastic spatula. My idea for a top painted this way is that it will look like it was painted over the years. was scratched, repainted, probably weathered. In all, that it had an exciting life, serving people for generations. Here again, I am sprinkling water over the paint. Water has different colors because I am leaving the paint brushes in it. I do not add any paint to water. You can use clear water. The purpose of it here is just that it will make those beautiful spots. And picking up water with a kitchen towel. Then I slightly go over the top with a wet rug and with a spatula taking some of the layers off, exposing the other colors and at some places all the way to the wood. You probably ask why I didn't use this top. I actually was very pleased with the way it turned out, but when I looked at the whole cabinet, I had an impression that the piece is too busy, almost overwhelming with the different colors. I thought that this kind of top needs more plain base. So I have sanded the paint completely off and repainted it the way you just watched it in the project number 10. Yes, after so much labor, I have redone it completely. This is the way we learn. I will certainly use this way of painting in a future project, but with less colors used on the body of a piece. Thank you so much for stopping by. Let me know which one is your favorite and which one, in your opinion, is most complicated. See you again with my new fun projects.